In this video, I will explain you how clean architecture work visually. First, let's start with the basic circle. Okay, to simplify everything, we will separate the clean architecture into three different layers: the presentation, the business, and the data. Most often, the clean architecture is represented by a circle, but you could also think it as a cone, because it's like if you see it as a bird view. And I think it's simpler to understand as a cone. So now let's redraw everything, but this time we'll put the cone in the center. It's the same structure. We have the data on the top, the business in the middle, and the presentation at the bottom. Since the bottom is the presentation, it is what the user can see. And more you move up the cone, more you are going into the database. By example, this is where you will get your information from an API. When we will code with clean architecture, we will separate every layer into three different folders. For the presentation layer, it will be the widget, the provider, and the pages. For the business layer, it will be the use cases, the repositories, and the entities. And finally, for the top layer, which is the data, it will be the repository, the models, and the data source. This was a lot of information right off the bat. To increase your chance to remember the folder's name, we will associate every folder with an image. The models and the entity will be the brackets. The repositories will be some sort of bridge, because the two repository will be a bridge between the data and the business layer. Next, we have the data source, which is represented by a database, following by the use cases, which we can represent as a business bag. The pages will be represented by some pages. The provider will be a web, because this is how we manage all the data. And finally, we will put a symbol for the widget. Because the model and the entity have the same image, inside we will put different things. The models is the thing that come from the outside, which is the internet. And the entities is what is on the phone, which we will present for a phone. Alright, so now you can associate some image with every folders inside each layers. Now I want to show you how everything is linked together. So we have a circle that never ends. And we start with the pages, which inside you have all the widget. And by example, when you click on a button, you will trigger a use case. The use case will use the repository inside the business layer with the entities, and will create a bridge between the business and the data layer. So that's why we have another repository inside the data layer, which this one uses the models. This repository inside the data layer will use the data sources. And the data sources will get all the data and then put it inside the provider, which will manage your data. And the provider will update your screen, which will update the pages and all the widget. This is a never-ending cycle. I would like to present you other way that you can see the clean architecture. Let's reuse all these symbols, and now I will show you how everything works together again. So we have the pages inside your application, which use all the widget. By example, a button. When you click the button, this will trigger the use cases inside the business layer. And this use case will get the data that you want. In order to get the data, the use case will need to pass by the bridge of the business layer and go into the bridge of the data layer. The bridge inside the business layer will use the entities, and the bridge inside the data layer will use the models. Once we have used the bridge to pass between the business layer and the data layer, we can now use the repository inside the data layer in order to get the data sources. And the data will return into the provider, which will change the visual of the application. Now it's time to create one last visual to make sure that you understand how clean architecture works before we code. We have the pages, which inside have widgets. And when the user clicks the button, this will trigger a use case. By example, get the data of something. And this something will pass into the repository of the business layer, and then go inside the repository of the data layer. After this, the repository inside the data layer will use the data source. And this is a new concept I want to introduce. The data source will go inside a logic. If there is some internet connection, then it will go inside the remote data source, because we will get the data from an API online. But if we have no internet connection, then it will get the data from the local database inside the phone. And once we have the data coming from the data source, this will update with the provider, change the values, and refresh the pages inside our app, refresh all the widget, and so the user will see the new data coming from the logic of the clean architecture. So you can represent clean architecture as a cone or as a circle. Personally, I prefer to represent it as a cone because I think it's simpler to understand how the flow of data work inside our clean architecture. You see how it starts from a user interaction, then it go inside the business layer, then the data layer, and then it go back inside the visual of the application, the presentation layer. And this is why in most image of clean architecture, you have the arrows coming towards the center. This is the flow of how everything works. In this course, you will learn how to use clean architecture for your own project. The goal is to make sure that you learn as fast as possible and as simple as possible. So this course has been rewritten like maybe 15 times just because it was not simple enough. So this is the latest version and it's probably one of the easiest way to learn. So what we will do today is first we will need to download the code. So the code is available on github.com and you can get yourself a copy. So you can click there. The link is in the description of this video. And next what we'll need to do is open a command prompt. Inside this, I will create my project in my desktop. So I will cd my desktop, but you can create your project anywhere you want. So what I will do is I will say git clone and I will put the HTTP address. So now I have the project in my desktop. Okay, so the next step is to open the project in Visual Studio Code. So you can see that my Flutter Map clean architecture, I will select the one in the desktop. This is the one we just downloaded together. Next, you will click on Run pub-get, or you can go inside the pubspec.yalm and click the get packages. It's the same thing. So what happened is this will download all the packages or the dependencies that is inside our clean architecture project. But if you have a problem at this point, it's because we don't have the same Flutter version. I have an oldest version and maybe you have the newest one and it won't work. So what you need to do in this case is, give me a second, I will just launch the application meanwhile I explain you how to do this. What you have to do is you will need to create a brand new Flutter project. Okay, and inside this brand new Flutter project, you will need to add the things that are inside this one. First, you will need to go inside your pubspec.yalm and you will need to add these dependencies. If you want, you can update them for the latest version. Otherwise, you can use the same version as I have. Next, you will need to go and add the assets and the fonts inside your pubspec.yalm. Because inside this project, we have some fonts and also some assets. So make sure that you have this also in your new Flutter project if your version is different of mine. After this, you will need to copy paste the library folder. So in your new project, you will delete the library and you will copy paste this one. Finally, you will need to copy paste also the asset folder. This is where we have the fonts and the image. So this was in case you can't launch the application. And at this point, you should be able to launch the application and it should look something like this. Let me explain you what the application does currently and what we will do inside this course to add to this application in order to learn clean architecture together. Currently, the application is a randomizer of Pokemons. So if I click search, this will give me the Pokemon 719, which is the NC, okay? We don't have the image yet, and this is the next step we will do together. We will create a new feature inside our clean architecture, and the feature will be to retrieve the image from the internet, coming from this URL. So this page is the API that we retrieve from the internet, okay? And you can see that inside this API, we also retrieve a URL, which give us the image of the Pokemon. So if we take a Pokemon, because yes, you can also select manually, If we take the Pokemon 6 by example, which is the coolest, we click search, this will give us Charizard. And if we take the font shiny and we copy this URL, we should be able to get the image of this Pokemon. So I will open a new page, paste this, and enter. This is the URL. So our goal for the next feature of this clean architecture is to retrieve this image and show it inside the application by using the clean architecture. Next, let me talk about the API that is currently inside the application. So the API we use is the pokeapi.co. You can go and click check out the documentation, you can go on the Pokemon section, and again, Pokemon. This is the HTTP address that we use in order to retrieve this information in the application. By example, the name Charizard, ID 6, the image, which is the front default and the front shiny, and the types, name fire, name flying. Okay, so let's try this inside our URL. So if I paste this and I put the number 6, because this is the one we have currently, Charizard, you will see that we have many things. First thing first is you probably don't have the same visual as I do. The reason is because I use an extension called the JSON view. This will convert the API into a JSON. So it's more readable, I think. So you can download this JSON view if you want. Next, let's go and minimize these things. And you will see that we have the name Charizard like this. Then we have the ID right there. And we have also the sprites, which is this section, and the types, which is this section. So currently we use only a couple of things inside this API. You can see it's only the name, the ID, the sprites, and the types. We don't need the rest of the API. So that is what is currently inside the application using clean architecture. And this is one feature inside the app. We will create a new one. What we will do next is we will talk about how this API works inside clean architecture in the code. So we will look at this if we go inside the code, but don't worry, we'll go pretty fast. The goal is just to give you an overview of the code of the first feature, because after we will create another feature step by step together, okay? The goal is to make sure that at the end of this course, you are able to implement clean architecture by yourself inside your applications. In this video, we will talk about clean architecture and how it works a little bit visually. In the next video, what we'll do is we'll go through the feature that is already inside the application, and I will try to explain you an overview of how it works. And after this, in the next video, we will start coding together. So now, let's give you a quick explanation of how a feature works. Okay, so when the user clicks a button inside the widget of a page, for example, this will trigger the provider, and the provider will trigger a function either failure or entity. This function will also trigger the use case inside the business layer. And after this, it will return either an entity or a failure. I will explain you later what we will do with the entity and the failure. When we trigger the use case, inside we will put a repository implementation, which is inside the data layer. But this use case will go right there, and it will trigger the repository of the business layer with the entity. And the reason is because we want to receive something as an entity or a failure. We don't want to receive a model. Because we use a bridge between the two repositories, this will trigger this data layer, and it will go through a certain logic. First, we will say, do we have any internet connection? If it's the case, then we will go inside the data source layer. In the data source layer, we will call the remote data source implementation because we have access to all this information, and we will get the information from the API. Right after, we will go inside the local data source and we will save all the data inside the application. This will return a model or a failure, and it will be automatically converted because we use the bridge of the repository, which this one will return actually the entity or failure. Okay, so now let's go in the other route. If we don't have any internet connection, then we will go inside the data source layer. From this one, we will go inside the local data source, and we will call the last information saved inside the phone. You remember the last time we had internet, we saved the information, so we will call this last information. And this will return us either a model or a failure. It will also go through the bridge of the repository to return us an entity or a failure. Okay, so now let me explain you what we will do with the entity or the failure. We will go inside the pages and the widgets, and right there we have some sort of logic. If we receive an entity, then we will display the widget with all the information. Otherwise, we will go through and we will say, do we have any failure? If it's the case, then we will display an error message with the failure. Otherwise, we know that this is currently loading because the either failure or entity just has been launched and we are waiting to receive either an entity or a failure. So this was the visual representation of what actually happened inside the circle of clean architecture. The user click a button which trigger a use case. The use case will trigger the bridges, and in the bridge we can use the data source. The data source will go through a logic to get either the information from internet or locally, and then it will update the provider, which will also update the pages and the widgets. So in the next video, as I told you, we will go through the first feature that is already inside the application. And after this, we will start coding together. So let's go inside the code of the project just to have an overview. First, we have the core. Inside the core, we have the connection to know if we are connected to internet or not. After this, we have the constant, we have the errors, which exception and failures, and we have parameters. The parameters, it's pretty simple. It's the thing you put inside the API. By example, if I go back inside the API, you can see that at the end, I need to put the ID of the Pokemon. So we have a Pokemon parameter, and at the end, we put the ID. That's the goal of the parameters. But don't worry if you don't really understand everything, because we will go through step by step with the new feature. Next, we have the features folder. This is where we will put all our clean architecture features. Currently, we have one of them, which is Pokemon. And inside Pokemon, you can see that we have the same layer structure, business, data, presentation. And inside each of them, we have all the subfolders, which is entities, repository, use case, and all the rest. This is exactly what I showed you on the board, okay? So what we will do is we can have a quick overview of each thing inside. The entities, what are the entities? The entities is what we get from the API. By example, you can see that we get the ID, the name, the sprites, and the types, okay? The type is a list of map, and then you have the type, and then stuff like this. And you can see that we have a list of type entity. If we go inside the type entity, then we have the type and then the name, okay? This is all the structure already coded, but we will do one entity together later. Great? So this was the entities. After this, we have the repositories. The repositories is the bridge between the business layer and the data layer. So currently there is just this inside, and usually you don't really need to change much things inside this. After this, we have the use case. The use case is the action that you want to take from this feature. By example, it's get the Pokemon. We get the Pokemon information, and also we push the parameters inside. In this case, it's the Pokemon parameters, which have inside the ID. Again, don't worry if you don't understand everything. It's just an overview. We will do everything together step by step in the next feature. We have also the data layer. Inside we have the data source. We have the Pokemon local data source. So the goal of this is to get the data locally. So we will have two things. We have the get last Pokemon, which this will go inside the shared preference, get a string, get the information, and retrieve the information as a JSON. Next, this will save the data inside the Pokemon model. It will return a Pokemon model. We have also another thing, which is the cache Pokemon. The goal of this is to save the data locally. So we will give it a Pokemon model, by example, and then we will save the data. So we will set the string inside the local database of the phone. Great. We have also the Pokemon remote. This one is to get the data from the API. This one have the get Pokemon, which is the use case. Inside we have the Pokemon parameter, and what we do is we use DIO to get the information from the API. We have the API URL, then as parameters we put the ID. In this case it was the number 6 to get Charizard. At the end this will return a Pokemon model from JSON. And if we have any problem, then it will return a server exception. Okay, next we have the models. The models is pretty similar to the entities, okay? It's pretty much the same thing. So what we do with the models is we have the same structure, so the name, the ID, the sprites, the types, but also we have the Pokemon model from JSON and to JSON. The model also have the submodels, and they are all the same. So the sprite model, the other artwork model, and the type model, everything. So this is all the submodel of the Pokemon model. Next, we have the Pokemon repository from the data layer. This is the bridge between the data and the business layer. So this is where all the magic happens. You can see that we have a feature that will return either a failure or a Pokemon model. This is called the get Pokemon. So let's see how either work. We will try to do something, and if it fails, then it will return the left side of the either, which is a failure, a server failure. But if the try works, then it will return the right side of the either, and then it will return a Pokemon model, okay? This is the goal of the either, and this is used because we have the darts package. Great? So what happened here is we try to get the Pokemon, and what we say is, if there is an internet connection, then let's do this online. So we will say get the Pokemon from the remote data source. And after this, we will cache the Pokemon, so we will save all the information locally on the phone with the local data source. And if there is an error, obviously it will return the left side, which return a server failure. Next, we will say if there is no internet connection, then what we'll do is we will get the last Pokemon saved from the local data source. And if it works, it will return the local Pokemon. Otherwise, it will return an exception, which will return the left side of the either, and it will be the cache failure. So this was just a quick overview of how the code works. After this, we have the presentation layer. This is where we have all the UI. So we have the pages. Inside this one, we have the data page. This is this page that you can see, all the information of the API. Then we have the Pokemon page. It's the first one. After this, we have the providers. We have the Pokemon provider, which provide either a failure or a Pokemon. In this case, it's returned a Pokemon because it worked. After this, we have the selected Pokemon item provider. This is a simple counter. Okay, so after this, what we have is the widget. The widget is all the custom widgets that we will put inside our pages. Because the goal of the pages is to be as clean as possible. Because we don't want too many code. We want the code to be as most as possible inside the widgets. Finally, if we minimize the Pokemon feature, we have the skeleton. This one is just like the skeleton of the application with the bottom navigation bar that allows us to navigate between pages, and that's about it. We have one provider, and it's the selected page provider, a simple int, which is the selected page. Then the widget is the custom bottom navigation bar. We have finally the template folder. This is what you will copy paste every time you want to create a new feature. You will see the template is very simple. Everything is already inside. As much code as possible is already written for you, and the only thing you have to do is to change a couple of things and just create your logic. The goal is to make sure that you can use clean architecture as fast as possible and as simple as possible. So what we will do is we will copy paste a template and create another feature together, and I will show you step by step what to do when you create a new feature in your clean architecture project, and that's about it. So let me just show you a little bit the template. We have the same folder structure, the business layer, data layer with all the subfolder inside and all the code. Then we have the presentation layer, a checklist, and an info feature. The info feature is just an overview of the clean architecture layers, the presentation, which have the subfolder, the business layer, and the data layer, okay? This is what you could put inside each layers. And this is the API we have already used for the first feature. All right, so for the checklist, this is what we will need to do together when we use a template and we copy paste a template to create another feature. You see, the checklist is very small, and this was the goal. The goal was to make it as simple as possible and as fast as possible for you to implement it inside your own projects. Finally, we have the main.dart. In the main.dart, we have all the multi-providers, okay? Keep in mind that if you don't want to use provider inside your project, you can replace provider for anything you prefer. For example, block or riverpod or anything else. I've used provider because I like it and it's pretty simple to use. So if we return to the main, next we have the theme data, very simple and basic. We have the home, and in the home, we will init state when we start the application. In this case, what it will do, it will either failure or Pokemon. So it will run the provider either failure or Pokemon, which will return the information you can see on the screen, char result. But if we restart the application, it will return Bulbasaur because the selected item number is the first one, so the first Pokemon, which is Bulbasaur. That's why. And after this, we just display the skeleton. So this was a lot of information right off the bat, but now you know and you have an overview of the entire project with the first feature already set up inside. What we'll do now is, together, we will create another feature, okay? And this other feature will be to display the Pokemon visual. So from the first feature, we have the information of the image address URL. And what we'll use is we will use this address, we will get the image, we will save the image locally, and then we will display it on the first screen. Let's do this. Okay, so the first thing to do is to copy paste the template. So what I will do is I will right click, I will say copy, and then I will paste it inside my features. So I will say paste. Great. Next, we need to rename everything that is called template inside each files, okay? This will be probably the most boiling code that we will do inside this course. We will do rename, and we will say this will be the Pokemon image. This will be the name of the feature, okay? After this, we have the business layer, data layer, presentation layer. This is all the thing we need to change also. For the info feature, we already have it in the template, so we can delete this file. Next, we have the checklist. This is all we have to do to complete our feature. So first, convert the template into the feature, okay? So we go inside each folder. So first the business, then the entities, then we rename this one. We will do everything step by step. We will call this one the Pokemon image entity, and we will go inside. A good tips for you is to Control F to select everything and to write the word template. So this will allow you to know exactly where you need to change the names. So you can see that I need to change these two for Pokemon image. So I will select all of them and I will say Pokemon image entities. Now we need to know what we will put inside the entities. In this case, we only get the image from an URL. So by example, if I do it again, I will take the front like this, copy, and I will paste it inside the internet. You see, we have Bulbasaur, okay? This is the image URL. So what we'll do is first we need to download this image, save it inside locally in the phone, and we need to find a way to save where the file has been saved. So we need the path of the image inside the phone. So this is what we'll need in the entities. But if, by example, for the first feature, we had to do something else because we had to save this information locally. So every time it depends on what your feature need to accomplish. Great. So for this time, what we need to do is to put the path because we will save the local path where the image has been saved. Okay. So now we have finished this first file. We can close entities and now we go inside repositories. We will rename this one. So you need to make sure to rename each file and then rename each word template inside the file. So it will always be the same name, Pokemon image, now repository. So what we'll do is we'll go inside and you will see that we have the template repository. We need to change this for the Pokemon image repository. So I will take this and I will select all template. So I will select this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. And I use the Control D for that. And next you will say Pokemon image repository. And we need to just remove the capital letter of this one, Pokemon image params. Great. So we need to create the Pokemon image params. If we go inside the core, you see that we have the parameters. In the parameters, you will see that we have a Pokemon parameters of our first feature. We have the template parameters. This is just to make sure that the template don't have any errors. And we have no params. So for now, what we'll do is we'll just create a simple class, and it will be Pokemon image params. Okay? We don't need to put anything inside for now, but later we will add stuff. So we can close the parameters and we can put the Pokemon image params. And next we need to import the Pokemon image entity. For this, we can just replace the word template for Pokemon image and it should work. Great. So we'll do a search. We'll do search for template and there is no more template. So this file is done. Now we need to go in the use case. So I will rename this for get Pokemon image. So you see, this is all the boiling code we need to do first. Next, we will change the get template for get Pokemon image. And we need to replace this word template for Pokemon image repository with this one, both of them. Then we have this one, template entity. So I will select this, the next one, the next one, and the next one. And I will replace this for Pokemon image. When you select multiple at the time, just make sure that you re-put the lowercase letters because we don't want any problems later. So for the Pokemon image entity, we just replace the template for Pokemon image. That's great. And we need to put also the template parameters for Pokemon image params. And also, I will move this on the side, and also this one for Pokemon image params. Great. So let's do a little search. Oh, right there, we can see that we don't have the Pokemon image repository, and we still have the word template right there. So Pokemon image. And now let's search for template. There is no word template inside this file, which is good. And we can move to the next one. So after the use case, we have done all the business layer. We are now inside the data. So let's go inside the data source. We will rename this one. And it will be Pokemon image local data source. We will go inside. And inside, we will replace all the word template. So we'll select this, I will say Pokemon image. I select 3 of them right off the bat. Then I will replace this one and this one and all the one that start with a capital letter. So we'll select this. Oops, not this one. This, and paste. Great. And I will also change all the small letters. So all of this. So I will say Pokemon image. You see, it's very simple right now. We just replace all the word template for Pokemon image. Pokemon image. Okay. After this, we still have the word template. So I will select next, select next, select next, select next, and I will say Pokemon image. What I have realized is this one, the cache Pokemon image, need a capital letter. Okay, so that's pretty good. Next, we have the Pokemon image model, which is not working because we need to change in the models. So this is normal for now. Let's find out if we still have any word template in this file. I will press enter. There is no more, so that's good. We can keep the file like this and it will auto-solve itself when we will change the model. So we can close. We can go in the template remote data source, rename this one, and you can put Pokemon image remote data source. Okay, let's change the word template now. So we'll say Pokemon image. Next, I will put template like this. I will select all of these. I will say Pokemon image. I'll put this on the side, Pokemon image. And we have the capital letter like this, like this, like this, like this, like this. And I will say Pokemon image. Next, the template params need to be called the Pokemon image params. And do we have more stuff? Yes, we have the template model. See right there. So Pokemon image model. So this seems pretty good. Let's find out if I have forget any template like this. It doesn't seem like I have, so that's good. Let's close this file and now open the model. Okay, you will see that right now, if I go in model, the data source still have a problem. But when we will change the model, everything will make sense after. So we replace this for Pokemon image, enter, and we replace all the word Pokemon template model for, you guessed it, Pokemon image model. Then the template entities will now be Pokemon image entity. Okay, for the import, we need to put Pokemon image. And then this will now be the path. If you remember, inside the entities, we have put the name path. So that's why we need to put path. Next, I will replace template for path also. And path like this at these two place and replace this one for K path. You see that we have a problem. We'll need to fix this really soon. You can click with the control like this and right click. This will bring you to the constant. We need to add one constant. And this one will be called the K path. Like this, and it's simply like that. Path. Okay? After this, we can close the constant and we can use the K path. And you see that this one is now available. Next, we need to replace template for path. And this file is fine. Let's go back inside the data source just to see why we still have errors. We don't have, and if I click on this one, we don't have anymore. So that's good. So we have solved the data source, the model. We just need the repository right now. So I will say rename. The template will now be Pokemon image. Repository implementation. We go inside and yeah, there is a couple of things to change. I will go inside template and I will select all of them. So this one, this one, this one, next, this one, this one, this one. I will stay with like this. So Pokemon image. I just want to make sure to keep the lowercase letter and the capital letter. So this one will be replaced for Pokemon image. And then we have the template model. So template, I'll select next, next, next. Oops. So we'll say Pokemon image. And I just need to replace this for the lowercase. Okay, so you get the point. It's pretty simple. It's just basic stuff right now. Template will replace these for Pokemon image. Now we can replace this one with Pokemon image. Pokemon image. I will copy this so I can paste it multiple times for all the lowercase letters. This one, and that's about it. And for the capital letters, this one, 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 which would be Pokemon image. Great. So this file is also perfect now. I will close this and we can close the repository and the data layer. I know this is a lot of boiling code, but you will see after this, it will be fine. For the pages, what we'll do is, in this example, we only need widgets for this feature. So we don't need any page. So we can actually delete this one. Great. For the providers, we will rename this one for the it's not template provider, it's Pokemon image provider. So I click inside and we have a lot of things to change. So let's do this. Template, Control D, Control D, Control D, Control D, and we'll say Pokemon image. Next, I will replace the template entity for the Pokemon image entity. Pokemon image entity. After this, we have the template repository. So I will select template, Control D, Control D, Control D, Control D, D, and we'll say Pokemon image. We have also this one to replace Control D for Pokemon image. I will copy this right there for the template and this template. And after this, we can rename this also, template for Pokemon image and Pokemon image. Next, we need to replace the future template for future or Pokemon image. Image. Great. So this seems good. We have still words template. So I will replace these two for these three. Template, template, we have still a lot of them. So all of them, I will replace this for Pokemon image. Great. So let's search inside this for template. Nothing is inside. That's good. After this, we can go inside the widget. In the widgets, there is no widget, but we will need to create one. Okay, so that was it. We can close all and we will do one last verification. So we'll say we will search everything in the entire project for template. And you should be able to see a couple of them. So we'll minimize stuff. And it's okay if we find them inside the template folder, but not in the Pokemon image. So you see feature template, 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 and all of this is good. We have checklist, Pokemon image. That's good. Checklist, okay. Parameters, core, constant. So everything is fine. Okay, so we've just finished to set up all the template together. I know this was a lot of boiling code, but now we have done the business layer, the data layer, and the presentation layer, which is good. We are now ready to start coding for the flow. The flow is all kind of the logic we need to create together in order to make a feature work. So what we will do is we will start with the provider. The provider is we will go inside this section. This is what we will set up. And the most important will be to set up the either failure or entity. After this, in the next video, we will go through the pages or the widget. Inside this example of the feature, we don't have any page. It will only be a widget. So what we'll do is actually this section. We will create all the logic to say, do we have any entity? Then display the widget. If we have a failure, display this widget. Otherwise, create a loading screen. Next, we will go inside the data source remote. So when we go through the logic of the clean architecture, we say, do we have any internet connection? If it's the case, we go inside the data source and we use the remote data source. This is what we will set up. And finally, we will go through the provider again. But now we will use the provider inside the application. So we will go inside the widget and we will use the provider to trigger the either failure or entity. This is how we will structure the next 4 videos. Okay, so what is the next step? Let's go inside the checklist. In the checklist, you see that we have done the number 1. So this is done. The next step to do is to add the flow. Okay. If you remember, we have seen inside the board a flow, okay? So a never-ending cycle. And we will start by doing the provider, okay? So we'll go inside the provider of the Pokemon image. So this is inside the presentation layer, providers, provider is image provider, okay? Let's take the checklist, and we need to add the required parameters also. So let's do the providers. Let me explain you a little bit what happened inside this provider. So when we call the provider image provider and we use the either failure or Pokemon image, this will first create a repository using the repository image, the Pokemon image repository implementation. Okay, it will implement it. So we have the remote data source, which use the Pokemon image remote data source implementation. Inside, we put the DIO package. Then we have the local data source. Inside, we put the shared preference package. Then we have the network info, and inside we put the data connection check package. Great. So now we have a repository. And after this, with this repository, we can use the use case. And the use case was to get the Pokemon image. Okay? And the use case, if we go inside, you will see that the use case will return either a failure or a Pokemon entity. Okay? So we will receive either a failure or a Pokemon image when we call this. So our goal is to send through the Pokemon image parameters all the information that we will require for this case to get the Pokemon image. First, we will need to get the name of the Pokemon if we want to save it locally on the phone, because we will create a file called the Pokemon image. So we will be able to retrieve it later. Next, inside this use case, we also need to have the information about the URL, because if you go right there, this is the URL, but we need to get this information from somewhere, right? Otherwise, it won't make sense. So this is how we will do this. We will create some sort of logic. We will create a string called the image URL. And this one will use a constant that we will create. So we will go inside the constant like this, and we will create a Boolean called isShiny. And we will say this as true, but you can put false. The isShiny is just to know if we will use this URL or this URL, okay? I prefer the shiny Pokemons, so we'll use the Boolean as true. I will close the constant. And now what I will say is shiny. Then if it's the case, we need to get the information of this path. But how do we get this information? The easiest way is to pass through the either failure Pokemon an argument. So we'll say we'll require a Pokemon entity. Because in the Pokemon entity, we have all this information. So I will call this one the Pokemon entity. So now we should be able to access this. So right after the isShiny, we'll say Pokemon entity dot, we'll go inside the sprites, because this is the API. You see we have the sprite, other, official artwork, and those two URLs. So we'll go inside sprite, then others, then official artwork, then, because it's shiny, from shiny. Otherwise, we will say Pokemon entity dot sprites dot other dot official artwork dot front default. Great. Let's move this on the side. For the image URL, we can pass this information inside the Pokemon image parameters, because this is the use case. So we will go inside the Pokemon image parameter. We will add two things inside. So I will copy this and I will paste it inside. First, we need the name of the Pokemon because we want to save the file in the local database as the name of the Pokemon. Next, we need also the URL. So it will be the image URL, just like this. So we can replace this for name, and we can add the required this dot image URL, like this. And we have the error because we just need to rename this as Pokemon image params. Good. So So we'll close the parameters, and inside we are required to put the name and also the image URL. So we'll start with the name. The name will use the Pokemon entity that we pass through this information, and we'll say .name because we have this information. And for the image URL, we will use this information, so the image URL, like this. So once we call this use case, which we'll need to modify a little bit, we'll receive either a failure or a Pokemon image. And then this will use the fold, which is used because of the either, and it will return either the left or the right side. If it returns the left side, it will return a failure. Then the Pokemon image will be set as null, and the failure will be set as the information received. And we will notify the listener just to refresh the screen. But if it's the right side, then it will return the Pokemon image entity, and it will set the failure as null and the Pokemon image as the information received, and notify listeners to refresh the screen. This is inside the provider. Don't forget about that. Because we have added the provider, we can now add this one inside the multi-provider. Inside the main.dart, we will go right there on the top, and we will add one more provider. This one is called the Pokemon image provider. This one. Great. So now it's added. If we go back inside the checklist, we will see what is the next step. We need to set up the pages and the widgets to see on the screen. So what we will do is we will take one widget that is already inside the Pokemon feature, inside presentation widgets. There is one called the Pokemon image widget. We will take this one and we will drag it inside the widgets of the Pokemon image. Okay? And I will say move. I will say okay. Perfect. So we have it right there. After this, what we'll need to do is we'll need to use the actual provider that we have created. And for this, what we'll say is Pokemon image entity, and this will be called the Pokemon image entity, is equal to, now we need to use the actual provider. So we'll say provider, and if you don't understand how provider work, I will put a simple video on YouTube how it works. So you will at least understand this thing. But if you want to use other stuff than provider, it's up to you. Then you will say provider.ofContext. Again, the link will be in the description of this video if you want to know how provider works. And you will say, so provider.of, and the of will be which provider we want to use right now. It's the one with the Pokemon image provider. So we'll say Pokemon image provider. And now because we have used this provider, we can now say at the end dot either the failure or the Pokemon image, because you know that this provider will return either a Pokemon image or a failure. So we'll say Pokemon image, semicolon, and we need to go at the beginning and just say that this can be null. It's possible. We need to do the same thing for the failure. So we'll say failure, and we'll call this failure. And now we can go at the end and say failure. Great, because either one or the other will be null. And now we need to change a little bit how the widget will work. We will create a logic. We will say if the Pokemon image entity is not equal to null, then we will display the widget. And the widget is actually the one already created. So I will put this inside. Then we'll say else if the failure is not equal to null, then we will display the widget is equal to expanded. Inside we'll put the child, we'll put a center, and inside the center we'll put another child and put the text. The text will be what is the error message. So we'll say failure dot error message. And now we can format document, and you can see that we have one little problem. I will remove this and it's fixed. Perfect. Let's format document and save again. I will put this on the side. I will also add a text style for this failure error. So I will put my semicolon first, I will put my comma, and I will add a text style. So I will say style, text style, and the font size will be 20. Perfect. Let's save. Let's put this as a constant also. And now we have a problem because this has not been set. So we need to put another else. And inside this other else, we will put the widget, which is equal to an expanded again. Expanded. And inside we will put the center widget. And the center widget will have a child circular progress indicator. So this will be loading if both of them are null. And we need to put this as a constant. Great. So now I will restart the application just to see what happened. You can see that we have this circular progress indicator. And this is absolutely normal for now because we have never run the code either Pokemon image or failure. So that's why both of them are currently null. This one and this one, which will mean that it will only return this information. So for now, we will keep this like this until we use the actual either Pokemon image or failure. Let's go back inside the checklist. The checklist tells us now to do the data source remote. I will go inside the code and I will go inside Pokemon image feature, inside the data, and the data source, Pokemon image remote data source. This is what we need to work on right now. Inside this section, we need to create some logic. So the logic we will create inside this file is, first we will use the path provider package. This will tell us the location where we can save the image locally on the phone. So this is the step we'll do. First, we will delete all the files already saved on the phone. Then we will use the dio package, and with the dio package, we will get the new image. If the answer that we receive is a status code 200, which means it works, then we will save the location of the image, the path where the image is saved on the phone, we will save it inside the database. And so if one day we open the application and we don't have any internet connection, we will be able to retrieve the last Pokemon image saved. So let's code all these things. So right after the async, what we'll do is we'll use the directory. And the directory will be just called directory, which is equal to the await of the get application directory. And this get application directory is only available if we use the path provider. So we'll say path provider, this one, we'll import the package. So now we can use the get application directory, document directory. This will give us a location where we can save the actual image. Okay, so now we have access to this. The directory we need to quick fix and import the Dart.io to have this information. Next, we can use a command from the directory and we can say .delete sync. This will delete everything, all the files already saved on the phone locally. So all the image already saved. And inside, what you can put is a recursive as true. And we need to put the recursive as true because we have it in the documentation. If the recursive is false, the directory must be empty. And currently it will not be empty because we will have saved some information already. Next, we need to define the actual path where we will save this image. And for this, we can create a final string. And this one will be called the path file. This can be equal to the location where we will save the actual image. So for this, we create a string and we will use the directory path. So we'll say directory.path. So next, we will need to use the Pokemon image parameter to put the name of the image. So I will say $sign again, and I will say Pokemon image params dot name. So this will be the name of the current Pokemon saved. And we will say .png because this will be a PNG image. So great, now we have access to the path file. What we'll do in the next step is we will use the dio package in order to download this image. So instead of using the dio get, we will say dio.download. And the download, if we go over, you will see that we need to put the URL path, so the internet path, and we need also to put the save path, where we will save the image. So the internet path, we can use this from the Pokemon image parameter dot image URL. And for the other section, we will need to delete this and put inside the path file that we have already created. This is the path file. So just like this, if the response status code is 200, then it will do the Pokemon image model dot from JSON. And so we need to save this information locally. Now we don't want to save the response.data in this case. What we want to save on the phone is only the path of where we save the image. So we'll create a map, and on the right side, the key will be the kpath. And this is the constant we created previously. On the other side, for the value, it will be the path file, like this. So now we will save locally the information of where the file is located on the phone. Now that we have set up the Pokemon image remote data source, we can go back inside the checklist, and we need, for the last step, to set up all the providers. So everything is set up for our clean architecture. Now we just need to actually use it. We need to use the either Pokemon image or failure. So I will close everything. I will say close all, and then I will go inside all my files. The first thing we can do, so we can have at least one image on the phone, is we can go inside the main.dart. Inside the main, we have the home, and in the home, we have the init state. This is where we set up the application and we trigger all the providers, which trigger all the actions. In this case, it's currently only triggering the either failure or Pokemon, which give us the information of the API on the second page. So what we can do is we can send the information of the Pokemon image provider inside the either failure or Pokemon. So when we call this one, it will automatically trigger both of them. It will trigger the information of the Pokemon and the Pokemon image because both of them kind of work together. So we'll go inside the either failure Pokemon, and we will say that we also require the provider, so it will be the Pokemon image provider, this one. And we'll call this Pokemon image provider. So we will require also this information because when we will trigger the either failure of Pokemon, we will receive either the failure or the Pokemon. If it's the failure, we will keep it like this. We won't do anything else. But if it works and we receive a new Pokemon from the API, then what we'll do is right after, just before notifying the listener, we will use the actual Pokemon image provider that we receive from the argument. And now we can just say dot either failure or Pokemon image. Inside this failure or Pokemon image, we need to put the Pokemon entity. So we will say Pokemon just like this. Or we can just say new Pokemon because a new Pokemon will be a Pokemon entity. Great. So now when we successfully trigger the either failure of Pokemon, it will also trigger the either failure or Pokemon image. That's the goal. We can go back inside the main and we need to add the other argument, Pokemon image provider. So this one, we will create it as a variable. So I will copy this and paste right under, and then I will replace the selected Pokemon image item provider for the Pokemon image provider. And then I will replace it right there also. So now we have access to the Pokemon image provider. And I can take this, copy it, and paste it right under, like this. So now we send the Pokemon image provider inside the Pokemon provider. Okay, so now if we go inside our file, we seem to have one error inside the search Pokemon widget. This search Pokemon widget will trigger the either failure of Pokemon when we click on it. So we also need to put the argument right there. And this argument will have the same logic. So we can go back in the main just to copy paste. I will copy this provider image provider, this Pokemon image provider, and I will paste it just before. So now we have access to this Pokemon image provider. I will do quick fix and I will add this thing. I will copy also the Pokemon image provider and add it inside the arguments, put my comma, format document, and now we can restart the application and see the magic happen. Here we go. We have the Bulbasaur. Oh, and we forget something. We need to replace the actual image with the Pokemon image entity. So what we'll do is we'll go back inside the widgets of the Pokemon image. So we have Pokemon image widget, and we need to replace the actual asset image for a file image because this is saved locally on the phone. We will remove the constant and we will put inside a file, and the path of this file will be coming from the Pokemon image entity. So I will copy this, I will paste the Pokemon image entity dot path. As simple as that. So now if we restart, you see that we have Bulbasaur. But if I click on random and I click on search, the number 19, it will return Rattata. So you see that this is the shiny Pokemons. You can select any Pokemon you want and click on search and it will work. It will trigger the first API to get the Pokemon information, this, and then it will trigger the other API, which will give you the image of the Pokemon. If you want to change it and have the normal Pokemon and not the shiny one, you can go back inside the constant, and in the constant, you can change shiny for false. So if now you restart the application, you will see that the Bulbasaur will not be shiny anymore. It will be the normal version. Okay? So if I click on random if I click on random and search, I will have all the normal Pokemons. Okay, so let's talk about the feature that we've just implemented together, the Pokemon image. When we click on the button to get the information of a Pokemon, this will first trigger the first feature, the feature number 1. And the feature number 1 will also trigger the feature number 2 that we have created together, the Get Pokemon image. And let's talk about this one. So when we click the button, this triggers the provider. After this, it will trigger the use case, and inside we put the repository implementation. And because it triggered the use case, it will go inside the business layer, and it will go through the bridge to go inside the repository implementation, use the function to get the information, validate if we have any internet connection. If it's the case, then we will go inside the data source, and we'll go inside the remote data source to get the image using the DIO package. And once we get the image, we will save the location of the image locally using the local data source, and we will just cache the path of the image. But if we don't have any internet connection, then we will go inside the data source, and we will go inside the local data source to get the path of the last image. And this will return us either a model or a failure. And since we use the bridge, it will return us instead an entity or a failure, which then this will go back inside the use case that we have used and return us exactly what we want, an entity or a failure. So we will be able to display inside the application, if we have any entity, then we will display the image of the Pokemon. Otherwise, it will display the error message, or finally, it will just display a loading screen if it's currently loading the either failure or Pokemon image. In the next video, we'll go through the same explanation, but inside the actual code, just to make sure that you really understand how we created our feature. So currently, what happened in the application? When we click on search, when I click random and I click on search, it will trigger and get the API information, save it locally on the phone. Then it will get the image Pokemon and save the image locally on the phone. Okay, all the information is right there. So what happened is, if by example I remove the internet connection and we restart the application, this was the last Pokemon. So if we restart the application, even though we don't have any internet connection, it will still give us the last Pokemon image with the last Pokemon information. And if you try to search for, by example, Bulbasaur, you will have the no connection. At this point, we have done pretty much everything inside the application and it worked super fine. This was clean architecture. Let's do a quick overview again, just to make sure that you understand how everything works and why is it so great. So when we trigger the application, we go inside the main. The main will trigger the providers. So it will trigger the image provider and the Pokemon provider. This will go inside the either failure or Pokemon. So let's navigate inside this. This one will trigger the use case get a Pokemon. The use case get Pokemon, you can find it inside the Pokemon feature, in the data, and in the repository. This is what will be triggered. Okay, so I will restart the application because we have some bug. My phone just bugged. So what happened is when you trigger the actual inside the business, the use case get Pokemon, this will trigger the repository. Okay. And the repository inside the data layer, which is the Pokemon repository implementation, will be triggered. And this will go inside the await network information is connect. It will validate if we have any internet connection. If we have an internet connection, then it will go inside the remote data source and get the Pokemon information. Then it will save the data locally. That's why when we reset the application without any internet connection, we still have the last information. Because if we don't have any internet connection, instead it will go inside this section. It will try to get the local Pokemon from the local data source, get last Pokemon. But at this point, we don't have the image. We only have the API information, right? So if we go back inside our Pokemon provider, at the end, when we know that it has been successful, that we have a new Pokemon information, we also trigger the either failure or Pokemon image. Now, if we go inside this one, I can right click. You see that we'll do the same logic. We will trigger the use case get Pokemon image. And we put inside the parameters of the name and the image URL. But the most important thing is we go inside the get Pokemon image use case. Let's go inside this one. So if we minimize everything and we go inside the Pokemon image and we find inside the data, the business layer, the use case, get Pokemon image, this one will trigger the Pokemon image repository, okay? Which you can find inside the data layer and inside the repository, you click inside. And this will go through the same logic. It will go, do you have an internet connection? If yes, then it will get the Pokemon image from the remote data source, which means from online. And then it will save the image locally. But if you don't have any connection, it will go in the other side and it will get the information from the local database because we have saved the information previously. And if by any chance or any problem happen, we always have the section of the on-server exception. If we have any exception happening inside this process, we always catch the information and we return a failure. In this case, it will be a server failure, and in this case, it will be a cache failure. You can put your own custom message inside. And the reason why we are able to catch the exception is if you go inside the server exception or the cache exception, you can see that this implements the exception from Dart. And that's the reason why we are able to catch it if the try doesn't work. So this is the overall arc of how clean architecture works. This is one feature that we have done completely together. If you have any question about this course, feel free to ask them and I will try my best to answer everything. And if it's really not clear, then I will make new video about it. Because the goal of Flutter Map is to make sure that you are able to use clean architecture inside your own project. And this was the completion of the course. Thank you so much, and I see you in the next one.